Thank you everyone for joining and welcome to this webinar with Susan Hanley. My name is Agnes Molnar. I am a CTO of Search Explained. I'm going to be the host of this webinar today. If you have any question at any time during this webinar, you can enter it in the Q&A window, which you can find down in your Zoom window. I am going to mute myself during the webinar, but going to stay here, and I'm doing everything that I can do to make this as good as possible. If you have any technical issues or something like that, just let me know in the chat window. Otherwise, enter your question in the Q&A, and we will discuss it at the end of the webinar. So, Susan, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Agnes. We have a small group on the webinar, so I'm hoping that you will feel free to ask questions, because it certainly would be much more engaging for everybody, actually, if you ask questions when you have them, and then hopefully I can answer them. So are we ready to go?
Yep, let's go.
Great. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit today about user adoption, and this is a challenge for me. I'm a consultant. I work with a lot of clients to design intranets. I'm an information architect by training, but I spend a lot of time focused on the people side of technology deployments. And oftentimes when we introduce new technologies to people in our organization, let's see if my slide will flip, the reaction we get is a little bit perhaps bored if it's too many changes or too many things, but more likely I think people are overwhelmed. They're busy, they're trying to get work done, and oftentimes I see people in organizations kind of doing this. They might not be listening when you're introducing new technologies because we're asking people to change, and change is hard. Really, really hard. And here we come to our users with the latest and greatest technology. We're going to throw Office 365, Microsoft 365 at them. And very often we have the reaction of, oh my gosh, this is way too much. Enough already. And people are just not necessarily interested in our bringing them something new that maybe they didn't ask for. So I often think it's a little bit like the story about how many psychiatrists it takes to change a light bulb. Only one, but the light bulb has to want to change. And so here's the thing. I mean, we have all of our little light bulbs, and they're not so interested necessarily in changing. And I think when we start talking about user adoption and user engagement, we're actually talking about the wrong thing. I think really our busy users that are heads down trying to get their work done are not really listening when we talk about adopting something. What they're focused on, what we really want to do when we talk to our users is talk about business results. And business results mean focusing on whatever is important to your organization or your department and introducing technology in the context of achieving business outcomes. So when we think about the topic of user adoption, I'm hoping that we can frame the discussion in the context of adoption as a means to an end. In other words, adoption isn't the end of the road. The end of the road, or the ultimate goal for the deployment of any new technology, isn't necessarily adoption, but business results. And adoption is one of the things we have to worry about to ensure that we get there, but the most important thing we want to focus on are business results. So we create these solutions and we introduce new technologies, and we wonder, well, why are our users not jumping up and down to use them? So one thing I think we need to think about when we're trying to talk about organizational change is that big changes are often the result of small steps. And so we need to think about those small steps to engage our users, to introduce them to how the technology is going to make their lives better or their work more efficient. And I often say that everyone in your organization is listening to the same radio station, WIIFM, What's in it for me? And that really means, as we think about adoption, we want to think about talking to our users from their perspective, from the issues that matter to them, from the business problems they're trying to solve. And that goes without saying that we should be building a solution that is worth adopting. So I think my second tip when it comes to adoption is that adoptable solutions solve both meaningful and measurable problems. In other words, we want to give our users a reason and a purpose for adopting the solution. And fortunately, when it comes to Office 365 and with SharePoint, we have some common problems that we can talk to our users about. And the first one that I talk about that usually gets people at least interested is about a disease that I think is rampant in pretty much every organization on the planet. And I call it versionitis. And you know the symptoms when someone emails you a document and asks for your feedback, and then you put your feedback in that document and email it back to them, and we end up with documents with an extension v1.v2.v3 .final. My very favorite is .final_sh comments. So that's me putting in my feedback on a document that was supposed to be final. And this disease, when you get a document that says .v2, you actually have no idea whether there exists a .v3. And when I introduce sort of what are the benefits of using SharePoint in order to do our teamwork, I often talk about this issue of versionitis, and almost everyone can relate to that pain of having to reconcile comments from a whole bunch of different people, some of which are conflicting, and more often than not, some of which that have been overridden or overtaken by events because whoever is reading or commenting on the document is not using the latest version. This also creates a problem for search because search will not know which of your documents necessarily is the most recent, especially if you have a .v3 with a modified date that is later than the modified date, or that is earlier than the modified date on .v2. And all of these things can happen when we are not using one source of truth for our documents. So we can usually introduce the idea of co-authoring as a cure for versionitis. And co-authoring presents an opportunity of, well, how do we do that? That means we store a single version of the document in a single place, and we send links and not attachments. So other sort of common problems in organizations, finding expertise, sharing with partners and customers. And I'm super excited because just yesterday, Microsoft announced that it will now be possible to invite external users into Microsoft Teams. And I think that's been a barrier to using Teams for teamwork in some organizations, because very often the teams that we work on are not just people in our own organization. And I've experienced this as well because I work on projects for my clients where I am a member of a bigger team, and yet I only have access to the Teams, capital T, Teams environment in the web experience, not in the app, because as an external user I can only have one tenant in my app, and it's my own. So super excited that we can now invite external users into Microsoft Teams, and that'll roll out pretty soon for some use cases and later on for all. So that's really exciting to me. And so again, another big challenge in organizations is understanding when something happens to an asset that we care about. And this is a great use case for really sort of two capabilities in Office 365. One is Delve. To me, that's search without having to search. I can find out things that have been updated that I wouldn't necessarily have been looking at. And then the other is creating alerts to get notified when something that I'm interested in is changed. And these are the kind of things that there's really no other good way to do that in the organization. And again, if we can speak to a user about a problem that they're having, adoption becomes much less of a challenge. And then the classic business process problems, collecting and tracking information, managing tasks and projects, and of course automating business processes with workflow and forms, now using Power Apps and Flow, are all really important use cases that if we can talk to our users about, again, business solutions, then adoption becomes much less of a challenge because we are addressing a problem that users actually have. So I think here's a few examples of problems that are ideally suited for enterprise social networks. And so when you have these types of challenges, you have a much better shot at introducing tools like Yammer. So if you change the discussion focus about what the technology is and what it does to how the technology is going to help solve a specific business problem, you're going to get a much better reaction from, for example, a sales manager. And so the challenge, of course, may be identifying all of these specific challenges in your organization, but you don't have to create your own examples. And Microsoft has a tremendously helpful collection of resources in the fast track assets that you can look for to see kind of a use case driven experiential learning opportunity in the collection of assets that will help you come up with the right way of talking about your new solution, and without necessarily having to think of all these ideas on your own. Because really, at the end of the day, people mostly care about things that are important to them. And to the extent that we can make adoption both personal, or make our solutions both personal and contextual, we should think about this in terms of introducing new solutions. I'm a major fan of OneDrive, and what I love about OneDrive in Office 365 is that it not only introduces the content, includes the content that is, that's what I'm working on for me, the operative word being one, but it also now brings in content from the team sites that I am working on, as well as the publishing or communication sites that I have access to. So essentially, OneDrive can be the center of gravity for all of your document-based work, which is really pretty cool. One place to go to get everything I need. And when you think about it, 90% of the time when you're about to sit down and do work, you really are looking for, now what's the document I was just working on the other day? And this really helps us find those documents without having to do a massive amount of searching for them. Sort of the other side of personalization is customization. And while this may not be for everybody, this example is actually the homepage of an award-winning intranet that was built iteratively with every single member of this very small 60-person firm. And what they are able to do is customize the homepage experience to create a personal, this is sort of like the iPhone app framework for their intranet. Now, while this may not be for everyone, this approach really worked for this organization. And so it really became clear as they were designing their intranet that each person had a different view of what they needed, and this was their answer to that particular challenge. And the important thing is this message from the executive, and that is what this has resulted in is an intranet which allows them to make business decisions. That they wanted an intranet that will allow them to make business decisions, and this is their view of what would make that happen. So as I think I've been alluding to, most of adoption is really about change, and you need to understand change when you think about adoption. So change is really hard for most people. I mean, if change was easy, we'd all be eating 100% healthy, we'd be exercising every day, everybody would be skinny, it'd be wonderful. And change is very difficult for us because in general, we are much more comfortable with that which we have than what you are introducing new and unknown. So there is sort of this whole psychological thing that says that all of our users are much more comfortable with what they know. And very often I hear this all the time. This is how we've always done it, and it's working. And you're coming along and saying, hey, we've got this really great new thing we want you to try. And honestly, your users don't feel broken. And so I love this quote. It's actually the title of a book, and it's also attributed to an individual, but change is good, you go first. In other words, oh sure, I'm into change, but we'll see how you do with it first, and then I'll take a look at it. And I think all of this relates to speaking to users from their perspective, ensuring your users that there is something in it for them, that there is a personal benefit, not just something that the organization is dictating from on high. I often think about adoption in this context of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I was a psych major in college. I get to talk about these kind of things. And I think, first of all, our focus in our work life is about getting our own work done, kind of the me thing. And then secondarily, we're looking at the people with whom we work every day, that next level of need. Today, and more, that means being part of a team, doing teamwork. And there's a lot of tools in the suite of Office 365 that help us do teamwork. I mean, that is basically how most work gets done today. And I think we really do want to think about that. And when I think about adoption, it is really hard to get to that sort of top level of need, to get the organization to mandate the use of a new technology. However, my teammates can hold me accountable to try the technology or to use it in a way that we've agreed as our team. So when we think about that in the context of adoption, think about trying to address sort of local needs first. And I think that's sort of my connection to Maslow's hierarchy. We are much more connected to ourselves and the people around us than we are to the bigger organization. And it's much easier for our teammates to hold us accountable than the organization to dictate something. So I really believe we need to think about change by not necessarily throwing everything at people all at once, that we should really think about small changes. I mean, there's only so much that people can absorb at any one time. And as we think about change, if we can sort of introduce something in small chunks, get people to be excited about it, we have a shot at getting their attention. So I like to think about batching changes into releases that only include one major thing at a time, so that we can essentially acknowledge the culture of the organization and go for what I like to call the long wow rather than the big bang. Give users time to adapt and develop new habits using your solution in new ways. New capabilities make solutions feel dynamic, evolving, and current, and that tends to pay off with loyalty. So I think we can learn from how consumer brands get loyal adopters and try to apply that in our own organizations. So I think about trying to help people create new habits. I read an interesting article that talked about how it takes an average of 66 days to create a new habit. And so I think that means we can't expect our users to immediately adopt or adapt, but we should really focus on reminding people for the first couple of months until they've really adopted or adapted to our new way of working. And one really great way to do that is to engage some helpers. And while you may not have all the friends that Ellen DeGeneres has in her selfie, you do have friends that can help with adoption in your organization. And one of the most important friends you can gather are the leaders. I love this quote: no involvement by leaders, no commitment by employees, no exceptions. I mean, this is especially important with adopting an enterprise social tool. Engaging your leaders is especially important. Leaders need to not only explain the why, but they also have to demonstrate the behaviors. Leaders need to make the connection between the tools and the business, period. And then they have to demonstrate their commitment by modeling the behavior. Now, sometimes our leaders might need a bit of an extra nudge. And so one thing we might want to consider is providing some one-on-one training for our leaders, and more importantly, recognizing where they work. So leaders, more than anybody else, are probably the most mobile people in your organization. And so in this slide, I want to introduce you to Seth Patton, who's the GM of Product Management and Marketing for OneDrive and SharePoint at Microsoft. And I had an opportunity to interview Seth at Ignite last year, and I was talking to him about a presentation I was going to do about user adoption and how and I wondered, sort of as a leader, how does he use the technology that Microsoft makes available to him? And the first thing he did was whip out his phone and talk about how when he's standing online waiting for lunch, he'll check news from all the teams that he's monitoring, and how if he sees something interesting, he'll post it with a video. And I said to him, would you mind posing with your phone, because you just made my case for my slide. So Seth is an executive, he's pretty mobile, and that's where he uses his technology. So I think if you aren't working at Microsoft, your executives might need to see some examples for unfamiliar tools. So one of the things I've seen work really well is to engage your executives to post sort of a bit of information about an office that they're visiting. Take a photo of something that they find interesting and do a short post about that when they're going from office to office. It's a great way to make sure that everyone in the organization realizes that the leadership team is paying attention to what's going on, and it's a really good way to demonstrate the use of the technology. I worked with a client once who had a leader who agreed to really make a huge commitment to the changes that they were introducing by bringing in a new intranet with new collaboration capabilities. And what he did was he refused to reply to email messages that came from anyone internally with an attachment. He recognized the challenges with versionitis, created a rule in Outlook that basically said, thanks for getting in touch with me, but I don't read email attachments. Please post it on the intranet, send me in a link, and I'll get back to you in 4 or 8 hours. So essentially he was making a service level commitment that said, hey, if you play by the rules, if you make it easy for us to no longer have this versionitis issue, I will respond to you quickly. So I think that's really important. But leaders aren't your only champions. I mean, they may be the best, but in addition to your leaders, I think there are some other people in the organization that can help. So one thing to think about is providing both leaders and other executives with a coach. And sometimes it just makes sense to have a person that you can go to help you sort of get over the hurdle of adopting a new technology. But it's not just the leaders that we want to think about. Every organization has these other influential people who may not be sort of at the top in the hierarchy, but they have a long and broad reach. So broad tentacles, if you will. And I'm not sure if anybody recognizes this little guy, but if you were in the US watching television in the 80s, you'll probably know who he is. Now, he's a little boy named Mikey, and he became an iconic representation of people who hate things and try something new and then change their mind. So Mikey's mom brings Life cereal home, and the commercial basically says, not to bring home healthy cereal because your kids won't eat it. And Mikey's brothers say, oh my God, we don't want to eat this. Let's give it to Mikey. He hates everything. And Mikey tastes the cereal and he likes it. And the brothers say, he likes it. Mikey likes it. And that kind of became part of the vernacular, which is try it, you'll like it, or oh my gosh, Mikey likes it. And pretty much everyone kind of knows that. And I think sometimes it pays to look for the Mikeys in your organization, because I think Mikey could be the key to your user adoption strategy. So this doesn't mean you need to find all the Mikeys, but I think you need to find a few Mikeys. So it's important to find these other influencers, our Mikeys, because they can really, really be helpful in terms of your adoption strategy. So another thing that I think is really important and unfortunately gets left out or cut from many, many projects is training. And training is a challenge because it's expensive and people often don't want to participate in training. So what I really want to think about, especially for the immediate launch, the first launch of a new solution, is I want to make sure that we are looking at ways to make sure that all of our users are comfortable that they can still get their jobs done even though we're introducing a new technology. And I think what we want to think about is a roadmap for training that addresses comfort, not overwhelming people with tons and tons of content. So I think in general, on day one, you want to sort of introduce people with, here's how you used to do something, here's how you do it now, possibly based on the top 10 things that people typically need to do in their workday. So on day one, you don't need to know everything. So this is my oldest child on his first day of nursery school, and all he really needed was his green backpack with Big Bird on it. So he was really excited, but that's basically all he needed to go to preschool. Fast forward 21 years, and here he is on the day that he graduated from college. And he needed a lot more to support himself through college and when he first got out of college. Very, very different needs. So think about, what does he need? What do your users need to go to preschool? And don't try and overwhelm them with everything they need to go to college on their first day in their new technology. So don't try to train everything all at once. However, do recognize that people do need to be comfortable with whatever we're doing that's different. So comfort, not necessarily 100% training. And then another thing to think about is that not everyone learns the same exact way. Adult learners need an opportunity to interact with technology no matter what their learning style is. And so we really do need to think about the fact that one size does not fit all when it comes to training. One way to tell if you are implementing a successful training is looking at what people are able to do. So this is not what successful training looks like. If people need to have sticky notes all over their monitor to tell them how to do things, you really haven't done it right. And I honestly think that the best kind of training happens not in a formal classroom 2 weeks before your new solution is introduced. I think the most effective training happens just when you need it. And that means probably focusing more on sort of short consumable tips and short consumable 2-minute kind of videos. I was in a conference session last week where someone talked about a statistic that a study that said that 4 out of 5 people today in the workforce prefer learning from a video than from going to a training class. And so I think we need to really think about that in the context of our work life. There's a whole collection of digital natives that probably did learn most of what they know about how to do things by watching YouTube videos. And while I think that video is absolutely critical as a learning tool in organizations, it really shouldn't be the only tool, because I think we do have scenarios where people cannot play a video. So I really like the idea of having both transcripts and video available in the same learning environment, delivered to your users just when they need it. And I think there's a few technologies that are on the market today that I think really help with making that happen. So my vision for how this would work is sort of what we're showing here, what I'm showing here in this slide from Visual SP. All those little eye icons are basically showing users where there is some training support for an activity in that context. So you can see right in the context. Now this is a classic SharePoint. It's a little bit harder to do in modern SharePoint, but you can see that there is a way to put more contextual information in the context of each service of Office 365. What's kind of nice about this tool is that it not only lets you bring in existing training, but you can also make your own and fold that in to the solution as well. So Visual SP is one tool that does that, and another that does it in a very, very similar way is Content Panda. And both of these tools will provide curated, let's call it out-of-the-box training for Office 365, and also allow you to introduce your training content as well. So one of the other areas that I spend a lot of time focused on is governance. And what I don't love about acquiring training is that very often training tells you what is possible, not how you actually want people to do something. So what I like about these tools is that if you create your governance content in small consumable chunks of information, and I have a whole approach for doing that, which basically says I don't ever want to see a governance document. I want to see a library of pages in a SharePoint site that has all of our governance information. If we make those chunks small enough to show up in context, I can show people not only how to upload a document in the context of a document library, but I can also teach them about metadata and whatever that means for our organization, and teach them about file naming in the context of when they're about to upload a file. So I think all of this is really about delivering information to users when and where they need it, and really at the moment of need, which is when people are much more likely to remember it. It's also especially important to do this when people aren't going to be doing the task every single day. So I go back and forth actually a lot about whether or not we should be training everyone in the organization in how to do something in SharePoint, or whether or not we should provide a center of excellence that has sort of a concierge service that says, all right, if you've decided that you need to organize your content in a new way, rather than teaching you how to create a new column and organize your content, having an information architect on call who can help people make the best decision for organizing their information, and then can just add the column for them and show them how to update the values. I struggle with this because I'm very concerned about having people sort of do their best work by focusing on what makes sense to them. And so there are plenty of users who could handle all of this on their own, but there's probably a whole other collection in many organizations that really would benefit from someone just helping them and doing it for them. And again, if it's a task you don't do all the time, you're much more likely to forget how to do it. So if nothing else, we want to deliver the training for how to do that task in the context of where you're going to do it. And then we have to think organizationally about whether it makes sense to have a service for some types of tasks. If you want training to be sticky, it's about training teams together. So this is a lesson. It took me a very long time to learn this one, but I really believe that the best way to get people to commit to working together in a new way is to train an entire team at the same time. And one of the reasons I love to do this is that it's not really about just teaching people how to co-author a document, because that's actually pretty easy to do. It's about creating an opportunity to have a conversation about how we want to work together. And so this kind of light bulb went off for me. I feel like it was way too late in my career, but I was working with a client that had teams of people in France and in the US that worked together on a regular basis. So the finance team was divided between two headquarters locations, one in France and one in Arlington, Virginia. And one of the things we did to launch their move from SharePoint 2010 to Office 365 was train the entire finance team at one time in how to use their new team site, how to leverage tools like OneNote, and how to name their documents so that it would be easy to find them later on. And what happened in the training session, and it happened in every single department, wasn't so much that people got to experience co-authoring. And believe me, that was really cool for people, because the light bulb really goes off when you can see how that works. What really was amazing was hearing people say, wow, I can see that what we're going to need to do is make sure we hold each other accountable, not to put .v1, .v2, and to send each other links when we upload a new document, to take advantage of SharePoint's built-in versioning capability so that we're always working on, excuse me, the most current version of a document. And watching people sort of have that moment is much easier, makes it to make that happen, it's much easier to experience it than it is to read about it or learn about it without an opportunity to practice. And when you get an opportunity to practice with your team, it's even better. So what we would do is we would, to experience co-authoring, we would have everybody get into the same document at the same time. Of course, it would be a fake document so that no one would really worry about things. And we would tell people to start editing for about 5 minutes, and they would be able to see how their colleagues appeared while they were editing the document. And then after about 5 minutes, we would have them stop, and we would look at the version history. And it's really helpful to do that so that users not only know how to look at version history, but they can also see sort of who gets credited for the win and whether or not every single change to the document gets retained. And that is something that users may not believe until they see it. And so I think every team should start out not just with their project charter and with dividing up the tasks, but with a conversation about how we're going to hold each other accountable for organizing our content, how we are going to organize our content, how we're going to name our documents, and how we're going to work together. In other words, creating a service level agreement for each other that we can all adopt. So the other thing we want to think about when it comes to adopting a new solution is communications. And communications happens not just when you launch something, although it's super fun when you launch, but it's also about ongoing communications. And I thought I would share a few stories about things that both worked and didn't work. So I collect these things. And so I'm going to share just a few stories with you today, but I have a story for almost everything because, some people collect things like coins or stamps or teapots. Well, I collect communication strategies. And so now we've got our fantastic and ongoing training plan to make sure all users are comfortable. We now know our solution is awesome and it's going to solve all kinds of really important business problems. And now we need to tell people about it. And that's really where our communication strategy comes into play. So one of my clients launched their new intranet with a really fun thing. Their concept was a birth announcement. Now this isn't exactly what it looked like, but everyone in the organization at 9:30 local time had a birth announcement delivered to their office. There were about 2,000 people, so they were able to do this physically. You could also do this in email. One of the reasons they dropped the birth announcement on everybody's desk is because, of course, just like any good birth announcement, it came with candy. And so the candy bar had the intranet logo emblazoned on it. And they talked about the birth of the new intranet. And of course, everybody wanted to try the new intranet because this was a great way to introduce it. Another organization I read about did something very similar. They patterned it after the commercial for the Kit Kat bar. And they gave everyone a Kit Kat bar, and the commercial for Kit Kats talk about taking a break. Also talks about breaking the candy in half. And basically what they said is, take a break, try the new intranet. And the thing that they did to make it really real for everyone is they gave people a charge code to use for 30 minutes while they explored the new intranet. And I've spent the 35 years of my career working in consulting, and I know that you don't do anything without a charge code. And when you send someone a charge code and a candy bar, you're really demonstrating that you think that it's important enough to give people not just encouragement, but actually the time to explore. Another organization I worked with did something that actually wasn't very successful, so I'll talk about that too. So they did something that they thought was very cute, and I thought it was as well, which was to get these little miniature Chinese takeout boxes filled with fortune cookies. And the label on the fortune cookie box says, "Coming soon, change management," and then there's a date. And when you open the fortune cookies, you'd think maybe there's a different story inside, but nope, it says, "Coming soon, change management," with the date. So one of the reasons I didn't love this is because it's not grammatical. Change management can't come soon. Change, maybe, but not change management. So it didn't make a lot of sense to me. So the leftover cookies ended up in the break room. See what's in your future. They're all dumped in a big container. And of course, the fortune cookies still say the exact same thing. So on August 15th, which was the date of the launch, absolutely no one had any clue what was going to happen, but they did eat the fortune cookies. So sometimes you have to think about, is my launch idea, does it actually make sense? Another client of mine did something that could have been a massive disaster. He sent everyone an animated email that said, this is our intranet today, and when you come to work on Monday morning, this is going to be our intranet. Sort of making a commitment that no matter what was going to happen, it was going to be super fast, because in fact, that was the biggest complaint people had. Now, speed is often related to bandwidth. Now, fortunately, they did a massive bandwidth upgrade at the same time. But this could have been a major disaster. So I'm not so sure I'd recommend trying this kind of an approach to launch your intranet. Or this one, which was an organization in Denmark that launched their intranet with a surprise. And everybody walked into their office on the Monday in which the new intranet was launched. There were balloons everywhere. And hey, welcome. We have a new intranet or we're using a new technology and you had no clue, but you do now. So may work in a small organization, but this kind of a is not easing into change. And so again, you have to know your culture when you are deciding how to do something. So in this case, this organization actually really made it fun. They filled about 300 balloons with helium, placed them all over the building, even in the elevators and in the restroom. And each balloon had a note that about one of the many new attributes of the new intranet. And again, clever, may not work in every organization, especially not a global one, but it's an interesting thing to think about. A client that I worked with did something that I think every wedding I've been to for the last 2 or 3 years includes a photo booth. This is my daughter and son-in-law. And one of the things that we did at my client was when they launched the new intranet, which was at a global meeting, they hired a professional photographer who came with a makeup artist to take new headshots for everyone to put in their profile. And initially, it was a little difficult to get everybody to kind of come into the room where the photos were being taken. But once we started showing all the pictures on screens in the lobby of the event, and everyone saw how beautiful everyone looked, like the photographer put the beautiful filter on everybody, we had lines going out the door because everyone wanted to get their opportunity to get their new picture, and everybody was able to choose the one that they wanted. Sort of unlike organizations that make people use their badge photos on SharePoint and Office 365, these guys were allowed to pick the best of the photos, the ones that they really liked, and upload them to their profile. So that was a big hit. And for the people who couldn't come to the main conference, they sent around a really good camera and a backdrop so that everyone could get really good pictures for their photos. And also those same pictures that many people use them on LinkedIn as well. So it really provided a great advantage. So another really cool idea for launching something new is a video. And the challenge with video is coming up with the creative. Fortunately, you don't actually have to worry about that because Ellen Van Aken has curated essentially some of the most amazing intranet launch videos, and all you have to do is watch some of them and steal the ideas. So I guess reuse the ideas. This is really about knowledge management. These are a few of my favorites. I love the one from Dartmouth Hitchcock, which is a Lego sort of story, and at the end they have Lego outtakes. They filmed outtakes of the story. So you see the guy is holding his coffee, and in the outtake he spills the coffee. It's very, very cute. Totally worth watching. This video from Beacon Health is really, really clever. I don't want to play it right now. It may take too much time, but it's only a minute in length. I totally recommend watching it because it was made very, very easily through video clips, and it was very cleverly put together. And so by watching a few of these videos, what you can really see is that it doesn't really take a huge professional budget to do some of these things, especially if you can reuse someone's pretty cool creative idea. Many, many of these videos were made probably with someone's iPhone. So I think it's really worth watching these to get ideas. And if you want to watch one that's quite a bit more professionally produced, it's worth taking a look at this launch video for Yammer with Virgin Trains, which talks about how the train operators were using Yammer to report a llama on the train. Also very, very clever, but considerably more expensive than reusing some of the iPhone ideas. So launching your intranet isn't just, or launching your new solution isn't really about just that one-time launch. It's also about creating ongoing ways for people, persistent communications, ongoing ways for people to learn about what's new, what's to come, what's going on, and to refresh their training. And so these are just some examples of what organizations have done. One of my clients did a bi-weekly Get Sharp on SharePoint. First 15 minutes talked about a topic, sort of someone teaching a new skill. Second 15 minutes was kind of an Ask Me Anything kind of session. 30 for 30 was an idea modeled after the show on ESPN, where in this organization they advertised to all of the teams and groups in the organization, give us 30 minutes at your next team meeting and we'll tell you 30 things you didn't know about using our collaboration solution. So really sort of good ideas for encouraging people to learn more and introducing topics at the time that people were kind of ready to learn about them. So adoption is also about support. So it's about communications, but it's also about giving people an opportunity to get some help when they need it. So one really, really useful technique to encourage adoption of tools like Office 365 and SharePoint is to create a team of evangelists to support the launch team. And so some organizations name those evangelists. So at Biogen, we called them Pumas, power users of Microsoft applications. Best Buy calls them ninjas, and they even have degrees of ninja. Like a Sapphire Ninja has 1 to 5 specializations, and you have to demonstrate your skill to get it, all the way up to a Shadow Eye Ninja that demonstrates more than 16 skills. And people can put their ninja status in their email signature so that everyone knows who can help them. Some organizations call them intranet champions, and then an organization I met with based in Germany calls them digital multipliers. And so again, the idea is to look for employee advocates to help seed the organization with evangelists in the business units and in the different geographies. I also love the idea of having a center of excellence that provides office hours so that people can bring their challenges to the center of excellence or to the sort of the tier 2 support and get help from people who have the, who can help them without going through the help desk, who we actually often forget about. So the other big thing we want to remember is to make sure the help desk is prepared, especially when you launch. So obviously we need to remember things like just-in-time training, but one of the things that one of my clients did was have kind of a walk-up help for Office 365 every Friday afternoon in the main lobby of the headquarters building. And you can do this virtually. Another client of mine had every Friday from 2 to 4. If you called a specific number, you could talk to someone who would actually coach you through your project. And then yet another organization I worked with actually assigned every new site owner a coach, a personal coach that was a member of the Center of Excellence team. Everyone from the business analysts and information architects to all the developers. And that really helped. It helped the people creating solutions in the business units know that there was somebody they could go to who kind of understood what they were doing. And from the IT perspective, it made sure that everyone kind of kept it real, that everyone had a connection to someone in the business. And it's really important, I think, for us in IT to remember who our users are and what their challenges are. And so this really gave them an opportunity for everyone to have sort of their mentees or coachees, if you will. So you can also make adopting a new solution super fun. And so many organizations, when they launch a new intranet, do a scavenger hunt. Some people award points and badges and prizes for doing something. One client I had gave people buttons for filling out their user profile. So one thing you can do if you're going to have contests, don't announce the winners in an email. Make the winners check the site to see if they won. That helps people sort of return back to the intranet. And another thing I've learned is if you feed them, they will come. And so I think any meeting where you have food seems to work in any culture. So if you want to bring people to a training event, feed them and they will come. One of my favorite sort of scavenger hunt ideas was done by Penn State. And they actually got some early adopters to fill out their profile with some unusual facts about them. And they put posters with these unusual facts all over the campus and then asked people to use their search, people search, to find which colleague met these criteria. Super cool and very interesting. The other thing I think we need to think about as part of our adoption strategy is asking for feedback and watching people, observing them use our solution. People will always show you more than they will tell you, and they'll tell you more than they will write down. I am not the biggest fan of surveys, although I will do them if necessary. But I really think that a survey is going to give you just some of the information that you need. It does allow you to engage more people, but observation and listening gets you qualitative information that you would probably find difficult learning from a survey. I was in a situation one time where everybody kind of told us everything about the portal was fine. And so when we went out to observe people using the existing solution, we would look at people struggling to find the applications that they needed every day. And while they said everything was fine, when we looked at what they were actually going through, it was very easy to see that they just didn't have a frame of reference to say, oh my God, it could be better. So hang out in the lobby, ask people questions, conduct usability tests. I'm a big fan of that kind of testing more than surveys. Listen to what people say and watch them work in their environment. Go out and visit them at their desk so that you can elicit some feedback. And the one thing that I've learned about adoption is that you are never, ever done. And while not everyone may be happy initially, we want to look for the wins and promote the heck out of them. And make sure that if we are going to capture some data, some metrics, that we have a plan to use that data to change. So I don't like the idea of collecting metrics just for the sake of collecting metrics. I want to make sure that we have a plan to act on those metrics and use opportunities like this webinar and conferences and user groups to share with other people and get some really good ideas from what others are doing. So adoption is also about sharing, but it's also, again, about measuring. And so I've been spending a lot of time in my career focused on how do you measure whether something is really delivering business value. And honestly, business value metrics exist for the organization. And when we introduce new IT solutions for collaboration and teamwork, we should be seeing business metrics change. So we should really be looking to the organizational metrics that we are already using and look for opportunities to influence them. Because if we're not influencing the big rocks for the organization, we're working on a sideshow project. And nobody wants to be number 11 on the top 10 list. So Microsoft is doing some nice things to help give us some information about how people are using Office 365. It'll give you data. It's not necessarily going to give you insights as to what they are doing. So you need to combine that with some other kinds of approaches to look at sort of what are people doing, and more importantly, what are they doing with the solution and how are they changing business value. But to have an adoption plan without metrics means you're kind of missing the point. So we need to have a way of taking a look at not just the counts of people, what people are doing, because that's kind of a proxy, but actually what are they doing and what kind of business decisions have changed as a result of our new solution. So here's all the tips in one place. And if you like these slides, I know Agnes is going to post the entire webinar online, but the slides themselves are available at tiny.cc/8QXNNY. And so that's where you can find all these slides, and you're welcome to download them. And here's a bunch of different ways that you can contact me if you have any questions. So I think we have a couple of minutes if anyone wants to ask a specific question.
Thank you, Susan. And yes, if you have any question, just enter into the Q&A box down there. Basically, I do have one to start with. I really like your stories about the communication mistakes and communication success stories as well. But I'm always curious about, the best one, the worst one, the biggest one. So what was the biggest mistake you have ever seen in adoption?
Well, I mean, it's real. Everything is very contextual. So a big mistake in one organization would not always be a big mistake in another. I think really the biggest mistake is to not talk to real users when you launch a solution. And I was once working in an organization where they explicitly told us we were not allowed to talk to any of the people who actually did the work, that the only people we were allowed to talk to was the committee. And the committee would know everything. And honestly, the best way to get people to adopt a new solution is if they feel that they designed it themselves. So limiting the participation of who can give you input is almost always a recipe for disaster. And so I guess if I would say there's any sort of one big mistake, it's ignoring the fact that there are real people working in the organization, and we need to talk to people who are both contributors, users, new people, people who have been around a long time. When I design a solution, I want to get a good cross-section, and I want to talk to people at all levels of the organization.
Yes, that makes sense. And what I really liked about each of your tips is that we can translate everything to search. Definitely you were not talking about search only, but everything was about how to optimize content, how to optimize search and metadata and everything. So definitely it's been very, very useful for me, and I'm sure for everyone else as well. What I feel being the biggest challenge anyway, not with only search, but in general, is that we do have Office 365 and new features are rolling out quite often, and the users have to pick up and have to apply those changes and everything. And we don't really have control over those changes. I mean, whenever they are rolled out, we have to adopt them like immediately.
So we don't actually have to adopt things immediately, and I think you've raised a really good point. When you use a cloud service, what you lose is control over the timing of when something new rolls out. For the most part, and I'm not saying they're 100% great at this, Microsoft has been really, really good at telegraphing when something new is going to enter your environment. And unfortunately, it only goes to the admin, but I'm hoping that will change. But if you're paying attention to the messages in the admin center, you get warning, and they even try to tell you what you need to do, who you're going to need to make aware of this change, how you should plan to introduce the change. And almost always, the documentation to support the change is already written. And so I do think it's really important to have people focused on all the different places, and unfortunately it's a lot of different places, where Microsoft talks about the changes that are coming to Office 365. So you need to follow the blogs, you need to follow the admin center, you need to pay attention to the tech community. I actually did a blog post about all the different places that you need to keep on top of to manage change in Office 365. And I think it's not just one person, because everyone looks at change from a different lens. So even though Microsoft now takes over the infrastructure management for us with the cloud, that doesn't mean we don't have an option or responsibility.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I do have the feeling that we have to adopt to be in the cloud, not from the user's perspective, but also from the administrator's perspective as well. Okay, technically we do have a question, which is not really a question.
That's very sweet.
Christina told she just wanted to thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, extremely well done and helpful. She will share it with the Ninja team for sure. It's really cool. That means Christina already has a Ninja team, which is great.
Exactly. So actually I have a couple of more slides, and I'll just show you what I've got, but I've actually tried to put together some key links to resources that are helpful. So I think Microsoft is doing such a great job now at pulling together support for adoption. So I talked about sort of the different sort of use cases. So again, it's super hard to create all of these, but to find them by industry, by role is really, really helpful. So there's a lot of great resources at fasttrack.microsoft.com/office. And then there's this great adoption guide that's really hard to find. So this bit.ly should be very helpful to most people. And then other resources, books, and I think anyone who's focused on adoption and usability should subscribe to Jakob Nielsen's alert box. This is every other week, 2 articles at least every other week. And while they don't always address Office 365 and SharePoint, they're mostly focused on internet sites. I find that I learn something really helpful every single time I read these articles. There's always really something good to learn. And then here's the link to Ellen's curated collection of videos, which are really, really fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing those and for your insights and tips. I really liked it. And thank you very much for joining us, Susan.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Bye.